Welcome back. Ooh, that's loud. I'm feedbacking. Okay, here we go. Clicker question. Oh, there we go. It's a review question. Which of these statements is correct? Output and income have the same value only in equilibrium. Output and income are the same thing. I'm still kind of loud, Rico. And have the same value. Output and income can have different values. Output and income are different things, but have the same value. Output is Y. Income is real GDP. A, B, C, D, or E, if you would please. And it's pretty quick. Let's say 3 more seconds. Check your batteries. 1001, 1002, and 3. Ow. 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 There's a distinct lack of consensus. Okay, output is the podium. Income is the income that was earned by the people who produced the podium. So outcome and income are different things. Output is this, the podium. Income is the funds that the people who made the podium earned. They are different things, but they have the same value. The 31% who got it right get a nice big happy face, and the rest of you get my, I'm scared face. What's happening 1 week from today? Midterm. Thank you very much. All right, couple of quick reviews. Try to tie this stuff into one little piece. I want to link together the production possibilities frontier from the beginning and aggregate demand. When we think about productivity and the supply of inputs, or if you had econ in high school and you did macro there, they might have called it the aggregate supply relationship with the supply side of the economy. Those things determine the location of the PPF. So the productivity of our inputs, the supply of our inputs, what in some high school classes they call the aggregate supply curve, that determines the location of the production possibilities frontier. So remember, we always have 2 types of output. Let me call them goods and services, just as a way of divvying it up. And so the productivity of our inputs, the supply of our inputs determines the location of the PPF. Is it really close to the origin? Is it really far from the origin? Where is it? The aggregate demand, which is called the demand side, the C plus I plus G plus net exports piece, that determines whether or not the economy is on the production possibilities frontier. If the equilibrium amount of output, that is the amount of output where output equals C plus I plus G plus net exports, if the equilibrium amount of output equals full employment, then we're at a point like A. So I'll say, for example, point A. We're at a point like A that is on the production possibilities frontier. So when we are producing an equilibrium amount of output that happens to equal the full employment, that means we're on the PPF. If instead C plus I plus G plus net exports equals output when we are at some equilibrium amount that's below full employment, then we're somewhere inside of the PPF, some point like B, and there's a gap. There's a gap between how much we're producing and how much we could produce if our resources were fully employed. So the supply side of the economy determines the location of the PPF. The demand side of the economy determines how much output is actually being produced. And sometimes there's a gap between these two. And the gap between how much is being produced and how much could be produced if we were fully utilizing our resources is called output gap. So the output gap is that difference between how much output we are producing in equilibrium and how much we could produce if the economy was at full employment. So suppose the full employment amount of output was 15 trillion per year. Suppose the equilibrium amount of output was 14 trillion per year. In that case, the output gap, let me put these glasses on. The output gap, which is defined as the distance or the difference between the full employment and the equilibrium amounts of output. In this example, that difference would be 15 trillion per year minus 14 trillion per year, or $1 trillion worth of output per year would be the size of the output gap. If the economy were producing another $1 trillion worth of goods and services per year, that would generate enough jobs to decrease the unemployment rate so that we had full employment. Closing an output gap requires an increase in aggregate demand. If we're going to move the economy from some point inside the PPF to a point on the PPF, that is, if we're going to close the output gap, there needs to be some increase in C plus I plus G plus net exports, because that's the only way to increase the amount of output that's being produced in equilibrium. Now, how big that initial increase in aggregate demand needs to be, that's where the concept of the multiplier comes in. Because remember that the total change in income and output is going to be equal to the initial change in aggregate demand times the spending multiplier. The total change in income and output is going to be equal to the initial change in aggregate demand times the multiplier. So if the multiplier is bigger than 1, the initial change in aggregate demand doesn't have to fill that entire output gap. The initial change in aggregate demand can be smaller than the output gap, because then we're going to get round after round after round of changes in output and income, the resulting changes in spending, which generate more changes in output and income, which generate changes in spending, and so on. In this case, what do I want to do? I'm going to play with that equation just a little bit. It tells me that the total change in income divided by the size of the multiplier, that's how big of an initial change in aggregate demand the economy needs in order to close an output gap. So the initial change in aggregate demand needs to be the size of the output gap divided by the multiplier, which in our case, with this example, would be 1 trillion per year divided by the multiplier. Clicker question. Suppose the multiplier was 5, equilibrium GDP was 14,000 billion per year, full employment GDP was 15,000 billion per year. To close the output gap, the initial change in aggregate demand needs to be A, B, C, D, or E. You can do this without a calculator. Oops. Fingers and toes, count your nose. That's 21. Take your shoes off if you need to. Three seconds. 1001, 1002, 1003, and stop. All right, good job. We got 69%. Get the happy face. The output gap is the distance between the equilibrium amount of output and full employment output. That's the same as we had on the previous slide. That output gap is 1 trillion or $1,000 billion per year. If the multiplier is 5, then we need an increase in aggregate demand of $200 billion per year. The multiplier process will kick off, give us round after round after round, changes in output and income, changes in spending. The total change in equilibrium output will be $1,000 billion per year. How do we find those initial changes in aggregate demand? They can come from any of our components of aggregate demand, from consumption, investment, government, exports, or imports. We, of course, would need an increase in consumption, an increase in investment, an increase in government, an increase in exports, or a decrease in imports. So buying things, spending the same amount in total consumption, but more of those things being produced domestically would constitute a decrease in imports. And what's important, remember that these initial increases in aggregate demand need to be independent of income. So it needs to be a change that's not due, DUE, not due to a change in income. So we can't get an initial change in aggregate demand that is a response to a change in income. We need some component of aggregate demand, CIG, exports, imports, to change for some reason other than a change in income. So a change in consumer credit availability would shift consumption function, a change in interest rates would shift the investment demand curve. Would increase investment demand. And then today, our topic is to look at policy. So today we're going to look at the G part of this equation, CIG, exports, imports. Monday we look at the net exports part, the exports and imports part. Then we have a midterm. Following the midterm, we come back. We look at monetary policy for 2 weeks, and that has to do with how these interest rates that are so important actually are changed. All right, so quick overview of policy, who conducts policy, and what the definitions mean. Monetary policy is conducted by the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank that was established in 1913 by the Federal Reserve Act and Act of Congress. Its headquarters are in Washington, D.C. Its directors are called the Board of Governors. There's the chair of the Board of Governors, which is Professor Janet Yellen from the Economics and Haas Business School here at Berkeley. And when the board is fully occupied, 6 other members of the board. Right now there's 2 empty seats on the board. There are also 12 regional Federal Reserve banks. The one closest to us is the one right across from the Embarcadero BART station there at the foot of Market Street, the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank. We're in the 12th district. The map is kind of squished to make it fit. The 12th district is really big because the district lines were drawn in 1913 when there wasn't very much population in the West and there wasn't very much economic activity in the West. And so there's always discussions about should we redraw these lines because the 12th district is so very, very large and constitutes such a large share of total output in the country. Yeah, maybe they'll do it eventually. It's one of these political things that the Board of Governors kicks around now and then. The monetary policy itself is conducted by a committee of the Federal Reserve. That committee is called the Federal Open Market Committee, or the FOMC for Federal Open Market Committee. And what they do is they change interest rates and the money supply, the amount of money in the economy. Concepts, the money supply concept we'll explain and discuss after the midterm. You don't need to know what that is for today. The ways in which they make these decisions about changing interest rates and money supply is through votes, such as they take at the meetings that are every 6 weeks. I believe I tweeted out the results of the most recent meeting. The majority decision of the members of the FOMC. There's 12 people on the FOMC, the 7 members of the Federal Reserve Board, so that's the chair and the 6 other governors of the Federal Reserve Board, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, because New York is considered to be the center of finance for the United States, and so the president of the New York Federal Reserve Bank is always on the FOMC, and then in rotating one-year terms, 4 of the other presidents of the other 11 Federal Reserve banks. So those 12 people together take votes. A majority decision determines what they're going to do to interest rates and the money supply. A little bit of terminology: direct policy, indirect policy, expansionary, contractionary. Direct policy refers to something that directly changes one of the components of aggregate demand. So something that directly changes consumption, investment, government, exports, and imports. Indirect policy is a policy that changes something, like, say, interest rates and the money supply, that in turn affects consumption, investment, government, exports, or imports. So direct policy is something that directly changes CIG, exports, or imports. Indirect policy is policy that changes something that itself will affect CIG, exports, and imports. Policy is called contractionary, wrong side. Policy is called expansionary if it increases, that is to say, expands total GDP. So if the policy leads to an increase in GDP, we call it expansionary policy. If the policy leads to a decrease or a contraction of GDP, we call it contractionary policy. So direct is CIG, exports, imports. Indirect, something else. Expansionary makes GDP bigger, thereby makes unemployment smaller. Contractionary makes GDP smaller, thereby makes unemployment larger. So when we look at monetary policy and categorize monetary policy using these two categories, indirect versus direct and contractionary versus expansionary, the monetary policy is changes in interest rates. Well, interest rates is not CIG, exports, or imports, so that's indirect policy. So change in interest rates is an indirect policy. Or changes in the money supply. The money supply is not CIG, exports, or imports, and so that's also say MS for money supply. So that's also indirect policy. You already have a sense of how interest rates work. If there's an increase in interest rates, that increase in interest rates means that some previously profitable projects are no longer profitable, and therefore there'll be less investment spending, so that's contractionary policy. And what you'll learn after the midterm is a decrease in money supply also would be contractionary. Flip it over, a decrease in interest rates or an increase in the money supply, those would be expansionary policy. And remember that we have the change in interest rates matters because it changes investment spending. And what you'll see on Monday is it also changes exports and imports. So that's Monday's topic. So interest rates, we don't think interest rates matters to the aggregate consumption because remember there's those two contrasting effects. Interest rates definitely matter, all else constant, to investment spending. Interest rates matter, again, all else constant, to exports and imports. And so that's the channel through which monetary policy works. All right, quick review question. Clicker question. Here we go. What's wrong button? Which statement is correct? Increasing interest rates is direct and expansionary. Increasing interest rates is indirect and expansionary. Increasing interest rates is direct and contractionary. Increasing interest rates is indirect and contractionary. Or E, I wasn't really paying that much attention. I don't know. Perhaps I should start printing out the notes. A, B, C, D, or E. 3 seconds. 1001, 1002, 1003, and stop. All right, interest rates, indirect. Interest rates are not one of CIG, exports, or imports, and that's what it means to be direct. An increase in interest rates, as we saw the other day, leads to a decrease in investment spending, kicks off multiplier effects, leads to round after round after round, leads to a decrease in GDP, a contraction of GDP. D is the right answer. 80% get my happy face. All right, so that's monetary policy. We come back and spend 2 weeks on monetary policy after the midterm. Fiscal policy, which is what we're going to talk about today. Fiscal policy is Congress with the approval of the president. It's changes in government spending, transfers, and taxes. And my microphone is falling off my ear. Changes in government spending, G, transfer payments, TR, or taxes that we pay to the government, TA. How does it work? These are bills that are approved in committee, passed by both houses of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. This is from your civics course in high school. Perhaps there has to be a compromise bill that then goes back to the Senate and the House and gets voted on again. And then that bill, once it's passed by both houses, is sent to the president for the president's signature. If the president does not veto the bill, it's signed into law. If the president vetoes the bill, it goes back to Congress for an override to see if they have enough votes to override the veto. So fiscal policy, monetary policy was a majority vote of 12 people. Fiscal policy, much more involved. So we've got 100 people in the Senate. We've got 435 in the House of Representatives. We've got the president. There's just a whole lot of people involved in the conduct of fiscal policy. Fiscal policy, remember, was, as I just said, changes in G, changes in TR, and changes in TA. Government spending, G, that is one of the components, CIG, exports, imports, and so changes in government spending are direct policy. Changes in transfers, changes in taxes, neither of those are CIG, exports, or imports, and so transfers and taxes are indirect policy. A change in transfers or a change in taxes will give rise to a change in disposable income. That change in disposable income will give rise to a change in consumption spending. So it's indirect. It eventually affects consumption spending, but it's an indirect effect. Contractionary policy, remember, is policy that decreases GDP. If there is a decrease in transfer payments or an increase in taxes, either one of those things will decrease our disposable income. If we have fewer transfers or more taxes that we need to pay, we have collectively less disposable income. That'll lead to a decrease in consumption, kick off multiplier effects round after round after round, changes GDP. Flip those arrows over. An increase in transfers or a decrease in taxes are expansionary fiscal policy. Both of those things would increase disposable income, leading to increases in consumption, kick off multiplier effects round after round after round, changes in output income spending, and so on. Government spending, a decrease in government spending is contractionary policy. Decreased government spending, lay off public school teachers, for instance, decreases the amount of government spending, leads to less income on the part of those people who've just lost their jobs. They cut back their spending. We did that on Monday, round after round after round, decrease in GDP. An increase in government spending, more people hired at the university, increases the income of those people who have jobs. They can go out and go shopping. It's expansionary policy. Okay, clicker. Quick recall clicker. Here we go. Which statement is correct? Increasing Social Security benefits is A, direct and expansionary, B, indirect and expansionary, C, direct and contractionary, D, indirect and contractionary, or E, better. 3 seconds. 1, 2, and 3. All right. So that's good. You've got that it's expansionary. Increasing Social Security benefits gives people an increase in their transfer payments. Remember, transfer payment is money we receive from the government for which the government expects no work in exchange. It's not a paycheck. It's not a payment for a podium. It's a check for which the recipient doesn't give the government any work back. That means it's a transfer payment. Transfer payments are indirect policy because they're not directly CIG exports or imports. So increasing Social Security benefits is indirect policy and expansionary. 75%. Get my happy face. Biggest wrong answer was A. Remember, Social Security benefits are a component of transfer payments, which are indirect policy. All right, let's try this one. If the goal is to increase GDP, who should do what? If the goal is to increase GDP, who should do what? Congress and the Fed should both do expansionary monetary policy. Congress does contractionary fiscal, Fed does expansionary monetary policy. C, Congress does expansionary fiscal, Fed does expansionary monetary. D, Congress does contractionary monetary and Fed does expansionary fiscal. Or E is what? Congress does expansionary monetary and Fed does expansionary fiscal. Pick a peck of pickled peppers. If you pick a peck of pickled peppers, how many pickled peppers will Peter Piper pick? Sally sells seashells by the seashore. 3 seconds. 1, 2, and 3. All right, if we want to increase GDP, are we doing expansionary or contractionary policy? Expansionary. So we can eliminate anything that has the word contractionary in it. Okay. Who does what? Who does monetary policy? The Fed. The Fed does monetary policy, so that, let's see, Fed does, so that eliminates E. Who does fiscal policy? Congress. So C. 68%. Get the happy face. There we go. All right. Remember that the Fed and Congress are not the same thing. The Fed is a central bank. It was established by an act of Congress in 1913. The national parks are like, the national parks were established by an act of Congress, but they're not the same thing. Yosemite, beautiful as it is not your senator. Just saying. Okay, so the Fed and Congress are two different things. All right, let's go back and think about the impact of the multiplier. Remember, our definition of the multiplier is that the multiplier is the total change in income divided by the initial change in aggregate demand. And so if I cross-multiply that, I get an expression for the total change in income, which is equal to the multiplier times the initial change in aggregate demand. The second time we've used that today, that should tell you it's important to know. So the multiplier tells us what's the total change in income when there's some initial change in aggregate demand. Multiplier works on the positive side if we're expanding employment. Multiplier works, as we saw on Monday, on the negative side if we are contracting or decreasing employment. First important takeaway, how the government spends their money matters. How the government spends their money matters. Suppose the spending multiplier is 4. Don't worry about where those numbers came from. Let's just suppose it's 4. And suppose that the government is considering a choice between a direct policy action and an indirect policy action. So one choice is to increase government spending by 50. We could make it realistic. We'll call it $1 billion per month. For instance, increasing defense spending. That would be an example of government spending. Increasing spending for highways. So let's get more of these potholes filled on the interstate highway system. So those would be examples of government spending, government purchases of goods and services. Or they could take the same $50 billion and use it on transfer payments. Again, let's call it $50 billion per month to make it realistic. Suppose that the transfer payments, they could be Pell Grants, they could be Social Security benefits, they could be Medicare and Medicaid benefits, could be unemployment insurance. Any of those things would qualify as transfer payments. Let's look on the left-hand side. If they do a direct policy action, the initial change in spending, that is to say the initial change in aggregate demand, two different phrases, same exact thing. The initial change in aggregate demand or spending would be the plus 50. And then the total change in equilibrium output would be the multiplier times the initial change in aggregate demand. The multiplier in this case is 4, that's given at the top. The initial change in aggregate demand is 50. That's what we just figured out. And so the change in equilibrium output, once the multiplier process had played itself all the way out, would be 200, let me put my units back on there, $1 billion per month. Suppose instead, the government takes that same $50 billion per month, and instead of using it to increase defense spending or transportation spending or something like that, they use that same $50 billion per month instead to increase transfer payments. They increase Social Security, they increase Pell Grants, one of those things. The initial change in spending. Well, transfer payments are not part of aggregate demand. Remember, the change in spending is the change in aggregate demand. What transfer payments do, let me write this up here because I didn't leave enough space. The change in transfer payments, that's going to change disposable income. Because remember, disposable income is income plus transfers minus taxes. And so transfer payments are bigger by $50 billion. It means that there is a change, is there room here? A change in disposable income of $50 billion. When people have $50 billion more in disposable income per month, they're going to change their consumption spending. And the change in consumption spending is going to be equal to the MPC times the change in disposable income. Change in consumption will be the MPC because the MPC tells us how much our consumption changes when there's a change in disposable income. The change in consumption will be the MPC times the change in disposable income. The MPC is not specified here, so I'm just going to leave it as MPC. So it's going to be the MPC times 50 is going to be the change in consumption spending. The total change in income, which again is the multiplier times the initial change in aggregate demand, is going to be, in this case, 4. That's the multiplier given to us at the top of the page. Times the initial change in aggregate demand is the MPC times 50. Simplify that, I've got MPC times 200 is the total change in income and output as a result of an increase in transfer payments of $50 billion per month. Oh, let me add some units. I'll put units here. Dollars, $1 billion per month. If the MPC is less than 1, which it usually is, if the MPC is less than 1, then the effect on income of an increase in government spending is larger than the effect on income